I woke up to a text saying, "Your husband is mine." The words glowed on my phone screen at 6 in the morning, and for a moment I thought I was still dreaming. But my hands were shaking too hard for this to be a dream. I need to tell you something, and it might not be easy to hear, but I think you need to know you're not alone if you've ever felt this way. If this story touches something in you, would you consider liking this video and subscribing? It helps more people find these stories when they need them most, and right now, someone out there needs to know they're not the only one going through this. I'm sharing something deeply personal today, something I never thought I'd speak about publicly. But here we are. I'm Margaret, and I've been living in Chicago for 43 years. That morning, sitting in my kitchen with that text message burning into my retinas, I was 67 years old and wearing the same faded pink bathrobe I'd owned since my youngest daughter left for college. The fabric was thin at the elbows. I could feel the cool air from the window on my skin through the worn spots. My hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, trembled as I read the message again. "Your husband is mine. We've been together for 2 years. Thought you should know." The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered on the kitchen table, spinning once before coming to rest face up, those words still glowing. I could smell the coffee I'd made just minutes before, back when the world made sense. The kitchen was the same kitchen where I'd made thousands of breakfasts, where I'd bandaged, scraped knees and helped with homework and celebrated birthdays. The blue checkered curtains I'd sewn myself in 1995 hung in the window. Everything was exactly the same, except nothing would ever be the same again. I picked up the phone with hands that didn't feel like mine anymore. The number wasn't saved in my contacts. I stared at it, trying to make sense of the digits, as if understanding them would help me understand how my entire life had just shattered in a single text message. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, in my temples, behind my eyes. Robert, my husband of 42 years, the man I'd met at a community dance in 1982, who'd promised to love me forever on a sunny afternoon in June 1983, who'd held my hand through 3 pregnancies and 2 miscarriages, who'd built our life with me brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. That Robert? I heard his footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, familiar footsteps. The same footsteps that used to make me smile when I heard them coming home from work. The same footsteps that had walked beside me through 4 decades of life. Now they sounded different. Somehow. Heavier. Threatening. He walked into the kitchen, already dressed for work in his gray suit, the one I'd ironed the night before while watching the evening news. He was pouring himself coffee, his back to me, and I watched him. This man I thought I knew, and wondered who he really was. I should have said something right then, should have held up the phone, demanded answers, screamed, cried, anything, but I didn't. I sat there in my worn bathrobe, frozen, while he kissed the top of my head absently, the way he'd done every morning for years, and told me he'd be home late, a meeting with a client. Don't wait up. I nodded. Actually nodded, like everything was fine. He left, and I sat there alone in the kitchen, the smell of his cologne lingering in the air, staring at the text message that had just destroyed my world. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through raising 3 children and managing a household on a tight budget and caring for my mother through her final years, that part tried to kick in. There must be some explanation, a mistake, a wrong number, some cruel joke. But the other part of me, the part that had been noticing things for months now, maybe even years, that part knew this was real. I thought about the late meetings that had become more frequent over the past 2 years. The new cologne, the way he'd started going to the gym 3 times a week when he'd never cared about exercise before. The way he'd password protected his phone, something he'd never done in all our years together. I'd noticed these things, filed them away in a corner of my mind, and then convinced myself I was being paranoid, silly, insecure. My sister Helen's words came back to me from a conversation we'd had 6 months ago. She'd said, carefully, diplomatically, that Robert seemed different lately, more distant. I'd defended him. He's just stressed about work, I'd said. The business isn't doing as well as it used to. He's worried about retirement, about money. I'd had an answer for everything, a justification, an excuse. I looked around my kitchen, really looked at it. The walls needed painting. The linoleum was cracking near the sink. The cabinet doors hung slightly crooked. When had everything gotten so worn down? When had I stopped noticing? I made myself stand up, made myself move. I walked to the bathroom, turned on the shower, let the water run until it was almost too hot to bear. I stood under the spray and let myself cry, finally, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest, somewhere I'd been keeping locked up tight for longer than I wanted to admit. After the shower, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, a towel wrapped around my body, and studied my reflection. My hair was more gray than brown now. My face had lines I didn't remember getting. My body had changed, softened, settled into the shape of a woman in her late 60s. When had that happened? When had I stopped being the girl Robert fell in love with? I pushed that thought away immediately. No, this wasn't about my body or my age. This was about betrayal, about trust, about 42 years of promises that apparently meant nothing. I got dressed mechanically, pulling on jeans and a sweater, and then I did something I'd never done before. I opened Robert's laptop. He kept it in his study, a small room off the living room that I rarely entered. It was his space, his domain, and I'd always respected that. But respect was a two-way street, and that street had just been revealed as a dead end. The laptop required a password. Of course it did. I tried our anniversary. Wrong. I tried his birthday. Wrong. I tried our children's birthdays. All wrong. I sat there staring at the password prompt and felt something shift inside me, something cold and hard, settling into place where warmth and trust used to live. I picked up my phone and called my daughter, Emily, the middle child, the practical one, the one who'd always been able to see through people. She answered on the third ring. "Mom," she said, and I could hear she was busy, distracted, probably at her office downtown. "I received a text this morning," I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, flat, emotionless. "A woman claiming she's been with your father for 2 years." The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long I thought the call had dropped. "Mom," Emily finally said, and her voice had changed completely. "I need to come over. Don't do anything. Don't say anything to Dad. I'm leaving work right now." She knew something. I could hear it in her voice. My daughter knew something about my husband's affair, and she'd kept it from me. I spent the years after my children were born in a constant state of motion. Diapers and bottles and scraped knees and school projects and teenagers and college applications and weddings. I had poured everything I had into being a mother, into being a wife, into holding our family together. I had worked part-time jobs when we needed extra money, taking whatever hours I could fit around the children's schedules. I had stretched every dollar, clipped every coupon, made every meal from scratch to save money. When Robert started his consulting business 15 years ago, I had believed in him. When he asked me to quit my job at the library to help him with his administrative work, I had said yes without hesitation. I had spent years answering his phones, managing his calendar, doing his bookkeeping, all without a salary because we were building something together, our future, our retirement, our legacy for our children. I had trusted him with our finances completely. He handled all the investments, all the bank accounts, all the major financial decisions. I signed whatever papers he put in front of me because he was my husband, my partner, the man I'd built a life with. Why would I question him? Now, standing in his study, looking at his locked laptop, I felt the first stirrings of a terrible suspicion. What if this affair wasn't the only secret he'd been keeping? Emily arrived 20 minutes later, letting herself in with her key. She found me still sitting in Robert's study, staring at the locked computer screen. "Mom," she said softly, and then she did something that made my blood run cold. She walked over to the laptop and typed in a password without hesitation. The screen unlocked. She knew his password. My daughter knew my husband's password, and I didn't. "How long have you known?" I asked. Emily sat down heavily in the other chair, the one Robert usually sat in when he was reading. She looked older than her 38 years in that moment, tired and sad. 6 months, she said. Sarah told me she saw Dad with a woman at a restaurant in the suburbs. They were holding hands. I confronted him, and he swore it was nothing, that it was a business associate, that Sarah had misunderstood what she saw. Sarah, my oldest daughter, who lived in California and rarely visited. She'd known too. I wanted to believe him, Emily continued, her voice breaking. He's my dad. I wanted to believe him so badly. But then I started paying attention, and there were too many things that didn't add up. The late nights, the weekend trips. I hired a private investigator, Mom. I'm so sorry. I should have told you right away. But I kept thinking maybe I was wrong, maybe there was an explanation. She pulled out her phone and showed me photos. Robert with a woman who looked to be in her 40s, blonde, attractive, laughing. Robert kissing her outside a hotel. Robert with his arm around her at what looked like a restaurant. Photo after photo, spanning months. Her name is Jennifer, Emily said quietly. She's one of his clients. Or at least, that's how it started. The investigator says they've been together for almost 2 years, just like the text message said. I looked at the photos, these concrete pieces of evidence of my husband's betrayal, and I felt oddly detached. This was my life falling apart, my marriage ending, my entire understanding of reality crumbling, and I felt like I was watching it happen to someone else. "There's more, Mom," Emily said, and something in her voice made me look up from the phone. I had the investigator look into the finances too. Dad's been moving money. Lots of money. Out of your joint accounts, out of the business accounts, into accounts in his name only. The room tilted. I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. "How much?" I whispered. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Over $200,000 in the last 3 years. He's been systematically transferring wealth out of your joint accounts and into accounts you have no access to. Mom, I think he's been planning to leave you for a while now. I think he's been preparing financially. I thought about all the times in recent years when Robert had asked me to sign papers. Loan documents, he'd said, business filings, tax forms. I'd signed them all without reading them carefully because I trusted him. God, I'd been such a fool." "My sister," Emily said, her voice hardening. "Aunt Patricia. She's been helping him." Patricia. Robert's younger sister, the one I'd welcomed into our home countless times, the one I'd helped financially when she went through her divorce, the one I'd considered a friend. She'd been conspiring with my husband to steal from me. "I need to see everything," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. "Every document, every bank record, every piece of evidence. I need to see it all." Emily nodded and opened her laptop bag, pulling out a thick folder. I spent the next 3 hours reading through financial records, legal documents, and the private investigator's reports. With each page, I felt the woman I'd been slipping further away, replaced by someone harder, someone who understood that the man she'd trusted for 42 years had been lying to her face while systematically dismantling their life together. The affair was bad enough. The betrayal of trust, the violation of our marriage vows, the years of lies. But this was something else entirely. This was calculated. This was theft. This was a man who'd looked at his wife of 4 decades and decided she was disposable, someone whose assets could be stripped and whose trust could be exploited. I found myself thinking about all the times I'd felt vaguely uneasy about money, but pushed the feelings away. 2 years ago, when I'd asked about our retirement accounts, and Robert had been vague, dismissive. Last year, when I'd suggested we meet with a financial planner together, and he'd said it wasn't necessary, that he had everything under control. 6 months ago, when I'd noticed our checking account balance was lower than I expected, and he'd told me not to worry, that money was tight but we'd be fine. Every time I'd questioned something, he'd had an answer ready. Every time I'd felt uncertain, he'd reassured me with the confidence of someone who'd been handling our finances for decades. And I'd believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. "Mom," Emily said gently, and I realized I'd been staring at the same page for several minutes. "We need to make a plan. You need to protect yourself legally and financially. I've already contacted a lawyer, a good one who specializes in divorce and asset protection. She can see you tomorrow." Divorce. The word hung in the air between us, 42 years of marriage ending. I kept thinking about this morning, about making his coffee, ironing his shirt, kissing him goodbye. How many mornings had I done those things while he was living this entire secret life? How many times had I smiled at him, trusted him, loved him, while he was planning his exit strategy? The front door opened. Robert's voice called out, unusually early, asking if I was home. Emily and I looked at each other. I could see the protective anger in her eyes, the way she positioned herself slightly between me and the door. I stood up and walked out of the study. Robert was hanging up his coat in the hallway. He turned and smiled when he saw me, that familiar smile I'd loved for decades. "You're home early," I said, and I was surprised by how normal my voice sounded. "Meeting got canceled," he said. "Thought I'd surprise you, maybe take you out to dinner." I looked at this man, really looked at him. The gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the slight paunch he'd developed in recent years. He looked like my husband. He sounded like my husband, but he was a stranger. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Who is Jennifer?" I watched his face change. The smile faltered, then disappeared. His eyes shifted away from mine, then back. I could see him calculating, deciding how to respond. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice had changed. "Become careful." I held up my phone, showing him the text message. Then I held up Emily's phone, showing him the photos. The silence that followed felt endless. I could hear the clock ticking in the living room, a clock I'd bought at an estate sale 20 years ago. I could hear traffic outside, a dog barking somewhere down the street. I could hear my own heartbeat, steady now, no longer racing. Robert's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Shock, then anger, then something that might have been panic, and finally settling on a kind of weary resignation. "It's not what you think," he started, and I held up my hand to stop him. "Don't," I said. "Don't insult me with lies, not after everything, not after 42 years. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time in our marriage, my husband seemed at a loss for words. Emily appeared in the doorway behind me. I felt her presence, solid and supportive, and I was grateful. "Dad," she said, and her voice was cold. "We know everything. The affair, the money transfers, Aunt Patricia's involvement. All of it." Robert's face changed again. The resignation hardened into something else. Defensiveness. And underneath that, I saw it clearly now. Resentment. "You had me investigated?" he said to Emily, his voice rising. "How dare you? How dare I?" Emily shot back. "How dare you? You've been stealing from Mom, lying to her, betraying her, and you have the nerve to act offended?" They were facing off in my hallway, father and daughter, and I watched them with that same strange detachment I'd been feeling all day. "Everyone needs to calm down," Patricia's voice came from behind Robert, and I realized his sister must have arrived with him. She walked into the hallway, her expression a careful mask of concern. "We can talk about this rationally." "Get out of my house," I said quietly. Patricia blinked at me, surprised. "Excuse me?" I said, "Get out of my house. You're not welcome here anymore." "Now, Margaret," she started in that condescending tone she'd always used with me, the one that suggested I was being emotional and unreasonable. "Let's not be hasty. I helped you when David left you, I said, still quiet, but feeling strength building in my voice. I gave you money when you couldn't make rent. I watched your children when you needed help. I welcomed you into my home, into my family, and you helped my husband steal from me. Patricia's mask slipped. I saw something ugly flash across her face. You don't understand the full situation, she said. Then explain it to me, I said, stepping closer. Explain how helping your brother hide money from his wife of 42 years is justified. Explain how being part of this betrayal is acceptable. Go ahead, I'm listening. She couldn't. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked at Robert for help. He said nothing. Get out, I repeated. Both of you, now. This is my house too, Robert said, finding his voice finally. You can't kick me out of my own home. Actually, Emily said, pulling out another document from her folder, about that. The house is in Mom's name. It was her inheritance from Grandma that paid off the mortgage 10 years ago. Technically, this is her house. You're just living in it. I'd forgotten about that. My mother had left me a modest inheritance when she died, enough to pay off the remaining mortgage. Robert had been relieved at the time, grateful. Now I realized he'd probably already been planning his eventual departure, happy to have one less asset to divide. I want you out, I said to Robert. Tonight. Take whatever clothes you need. We'll sort out the rest through lawyers. Margaret, be reasonable, he said, trying a different tactic. We've been together for over 40 years. Don't you think we can talk about this like adults? Adults, I repeated. Adults don't have affairs for 2 years while their spouse is at home being faithful. Adults don't steal money from joint accounts. Adults don't conspire with their siblings to hide assets. Adults don't lie and manipulate and betray the person who stood beside them for 4 decades. It just happened, he said, and he had the audacity to sound plaintive. Jennifer and I, we just connected. I never meant for this to happen. For 2 years, I said. It just happened for 2 years. And the money? Did that just happen too? Did you accidentally transfer $200,000 into your private accounts? His face flushed red. You would never have understood, he said. And now the resentment I'd glimpsed earlier came flooding out. You've been content to just coast through life. No ambition, no drive. I built a business. I made something of myself. That money is mine. I stared at him. This man I'd shared my life with, and I didn't recognize him at all. I answered your phones for 15 years, I said, my voice shaking now, but not with fear, with rage. I managed your calendar, did your bookkeeping, supported your business without salary or benefits or recognition. I raised your children, managed your household, sacrificed my career so you could build yours. That money is ours. It was always supposed to be ours. Robert looked away. I saw Patricia put her hand on his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. They stood there together, siblings united against me, and I felt the full weight of the conspiracy. This hadn't been a spontaneous affair or a moment of weakness. This had been planned, calculated, a systematic dismantling of my life while I remained trusting and oblivious. I want both of you out of my house in 1 hour, I said. If you're not gone, I'm calling the police and reporting this as theft. Emily has copies of all the financial records. I will be pursuing every legal avenue available to recover what you've stolen from me. You're making a mistake, Patricia said. If you pursue this, it will tear the family apart. The family is already torn apart, Emily said from behind me. You two did that yourselves. Robert and Patricia left, finally, with Robert packing a bag while Emily and I watched from the doorway of the bedroom we'd shared for 42 years. He took his suits, his shoes, his toiletries, moving quickly and silently. Patricia waited in the hallway, and I heard her on the phone, presumably calling someone to report this disaster. When they were gone, I walked through my house, seeing it with new eyes. Every room held memories that now felt tainted. The living room where we'd watched our children grow up, the kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals, the bedroom where we'd made love, talked about our dreams, planned our future. all of it contaminated by lies. Emily stayed with me that night. We ordered Chinese food and ate it at the kitchen table, and she told me about her own marriage, how she'd almost made the mistake of trusting too much, of not paying attention to the financial details. She'd learned from watching me, she said, learned what not to do. "I'm sorry," I told her. "I'm sorry you had to learn that lesson from your mother's mistakes." "They weren't your mistakes, Mom," she said fiercely. "This isn't your fault. He did this. He and Aunt Patricia. They chose to lie and steal and betray. You chose to trust and love and believe. Those aren't weaknesses. But maybe they were. Maybe trust was a weakness when it was given so completely, so blindly. Maybe love was a weakness when it asked for nothing in return, when it accepted everything without question." That night, alone in my bed for the first time in 42 years, I lay awake and thought about all the warning signs I'd missed or ignored. The way Robert had become more critical in recent years, finding fault with little things. The way he'd pulled away physically, claiming stress or fatigue. The way he'd stopped asking about my day, my thoughts, my feelings. I'd attributed it all to aging, to the natural evolution of a long marriage, to the stresses of approaching retirement. I'd never considered that he might be pulling away because he'd already mentally left. The next morning, I met with the lawyer Emily had found, a sharp woman in her 50s named Carol, who listened to my story without judgment and then laid out my options with brutal clarity. I could pursue divorce, which would mean dividing assets and probably a lengthy legal battle given the hidden money. I could pursue criminal charges for the theft, which might result in Robert and Patricia facing legal consequences, but would definitely tear the family apart publicly. Or I could try to negotiate a settlement, recovering what I could while avoiding the courts. "What do you want?" Carol asked me, leaning forward across her desk. "Not what's easiest, or what will make the least waves. What do you actually want?" I thought about it, really thought about it. What did I want? "I want my dignity back," I said finally. "I want him to understand what he's done. I want to make sure I'm financially secure so I never have to depend on anyone again. And I want my children and grandchildren to know the truth." "Then we fight," Carol said simply. "We recover your assets, we make sure you're protected, and we let the truth come out naturally. No covering up, no protecting reputations, no sweeping this under the rug. The truth." Over the following weeks, I discovered the full extent of Robert's deception. It wasn't just the $200,000 Emily's investigator had found. There was more, hidden in business accounts, in investments I'd known nothing about, in property he'd purchased using our money but putting only his name on the deeds. My lawyer estimated he'd diverted close to $500,000 over the past 5 years, systematically moving our joint wealth into his name only. My children rallied around me. Emily took a leave of absence from work to help me sort through the financial mess. Sarah flew in from California and stayed for 2 weeks, going through every document with me, helping me understand the full scope of what had happened. Even my youngest, James, who'd always been closest to his father, couldn't defend Robert once he saw the evidence. The family divided clearly and quickly. My children stood with me. Robert's sister and her children sided with him, as I'd expected. Friends we'd known for decades found themselves forced to choose, and I learned quickly who'd been truly friends and who'd been merely acquaintances. Some people I'd considered close disappeared from my life without explanation. Others I'd barely known showed up with casseroles and offers of help and shoulders to cry on. Robert moved in with Jennifer, I learned through mutual acquaintances. They were living in a condo in the suburbs, the same condo I later discovered he'd purchased 2 years ago using money transferred from our accounts. He'd been planning this for so long, building his escape while I remained clueless in our family home. Patricia called me once, about 3 weeks after everything came out. She tried to convince me to drop the legal proceedings, claiming it was tearing the family apart, that the children shouldn't have to choose sides, that we should be able to work this out privately like adults. You helped him steal from me, I said simply. You conspired to destroy my financial security. You betrayed me just as much as he did. There's nothing to work out. She tried to argue that I was being vindictive, that I was using the situation to punish Robert for the affair, as if the affair was the issue. The affair hurt, yes. The betrayal of our vows was painful. But the theft, the conspiracy, the systematic destruction of my financial security while I trusted him completely, that was something else entirely. I hung up on her mid-sentence. She didn't call back. My health scare came 6 weeks into the separation. I'd been feeling tired, more than usual, with headaches that wouldn't go away. Emily finally dragged me to the doctor, worried I was making myself sick with stress. The doctor ran tests and then sat me down with a serious expression. Your blood pressure is dangerously high, he said. Your stress levels are through the roof. If you don't take better care of yourself, you're looking at a heart attack or stroke. I'm fine, I started to say, but he cut me off. You're not fine, he said bluntly. You've been dealing with an enormous trauma, and you're not dealing with it healthily. You're not sleeping. You're not eating properly. You're running yourself into the ground. When was the last time you did something for yourself? Something that wasn't about the divorce or the finances or taking care of other people? I couldn't remember. Literally couldn't remember the last time I'd done something purely for my own enjoyment. The doctor prescribed medication for the blood pressure, but also gave me a prescription for therapy. You need to process this, he said. Not just power through it. Actually process it. I went home and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked. The doctor was right. I looked exhausted, thin, worn out, like I'd aged 10 years in 6 weeks. My skin was gray. My eyes had dark circles underneath them. I looked like a woman on the edge of collapse. That's when I saw it, really saw it. I'd been so focused on the betrayal, on the legal battles, on protecting my assets and my dignity that I'd forgotten to protect myself. I'd been doing what I'd always done, taking care of everyone else while neglecting my own needs. Even in my rage and hurt, I was still playing the same role I'd always played, the caretaker, the one who holds everything together, the one who sacrifices herself for others. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub and finally let myself break completely. Not the angry tears I'd cried before, or the bitter tears, or the shocked tears. These were different. These were grief. Pure, deep grief for the life I'd lost, for the man I'd thought I married, for the trust that had been destroyed, for the years I'd given to someone who'd valued me so little. Emily found me there an hour later, still sitting on the edge of the tub, cried out and exhausted. "Mom," she said softly, and she sat down beside me, putting her arm around my shoulders. "We need to get you help." Real help, she was right. I needed more than a lawyer and a financial advisor. I needed someone to help me understand how I'd gotten to this place, how I'd missed so many signs, how I could rebuild not just my finances, but myself. I started therapy 2 days later. The therapist was a woman in her 60s who specialized in trauma and late-life transitions. In our first session, she asked me to talk about my marriage, not the betrayal but the years before, the patterns and dynamics. As I talked, describing my role as caretaker and supporter, describing how I'd always put Robert's needs first, describing how I'd justified his distance and his criticisms and his emotional withdrawal, I heard myself with new ears. I heard a woman who'd disappeared into her marriage, who'd lost herself in being a wife and mother, who'd accepted less and less while giving more and more. "When did you stop having needs of your own?" the therapist asked. I couldn't answer. I genuinely didn't know. My old college friend, Ruth, appeared in my life during week 8 of the separation. We'd been roommates freshman year, stayed close through graduation, but had drifted apart over the decades as life took us in different directions. She'd moved to Seattle, married, divorced, built a career in real estate. We'd exchanged Christmas cards but hadn't had a real conversation in years. She called me out of the blue one evening. "I saw what happened on Facebook," she said without preamble. "Emily posted something about supporting you through a difficult time. What's going on?" I told her everything. The whole story spilled out in a rush, and she listened without interrupting until I was finished. Then she said something I'll never forget. "This isn't you, Margaret. The woman I knew in college wouldn't have put up with this for 42 seconds, let alone 42 years. What happened to you?" It was a fair question. What had happened to me? When had I become this person who accepted so little, who trusted so completely, who gave away her power so freely? "You're worth more than this," Ruth said firmly. "You always were. You've just forgotten. And it's time to remember." She flew out to visit me the following week and stayed for 5 days. Ruth was like a force of nature, sweeping through my life with tough love and practical advice. She helped me go through my closet, throwing out worn-out clothes and things I'd kept out of obligation rather than love. She took me shopping, insisting I buy things that made me feel good, not just practical things or sensible things. She made me go to a spa with her, my first visit to a spa in probably 20 years. And while we sat in the steam room, she told me about her own divorce and how it had forced her to rediscover who she was outside of being someone's wife. "The woman who married Robert isn't the woman you have to be now," she said. "You get to choose who you become next." It was a revelation. I'd been so focused on what I'd lost, I hadn't considered what I might gain. Freedom, independence, the chance to discover who Margaret was when she wasn't defined by being Robert's wife or someone's mother. Ruth's visit planted something in me, a seed of possibility, a sense that maybe this ending could also be a beginning. But first, I needed to finish what I'd started. The legal battle was ongoing, and my lawyer had uncovered even more hidden assets. Robert was fighting the divorce, not because he wanted to reconcile, but because he didn't want to give up what he'd taken. He claimed the money in his separate accounts was business profit, that he'd earned it, that I had no right to it. My lawyer systematically demolished those claims. She showed how the money had come from joint accounts, how I'd worked in the business for years without compensation, how the business success was built on my unpaid labor as much as his paid work. She demonstrated the deliberate deception, the conspiracy with Patricia, the pattern of hiding assets. But here's what I didn't see coming. During a routine review of business documents, my lawyer discovered something that made her go very still. "Margaret," she said carefully, "do you remember signing articles of incorporation for a new company about 3 years ago? Something called RPJ Consulting?" I vaguely remembered it. Robert had put papers in front of me at dinner one night, said it was a restructuring of his business for tax purposes that I needed to sign as a formality. I'd signed without really reading it, as I'd done so many times before. "That company owns the condo where Robert and Jennifer are living," Carol said. "And according to the articles of incorporation, you're listed as a 50% owner. He never transferred that ownership out of your name. I think he forgot. Which means you own half the property he's living in with his mistress." The irony was almost funny. Robert had been so careful about hiding money in his own accounts, but he'd made a mistake with the condo. And that mistake might give us the leverage we needed. But there was more. Carol kept digging and found that RPJ Consulting had been paying for Jennifer's car lease, her gym membership, her credit cards. Business expenses, Robert claimed, but my lawyer could prove they weren't. He'd been using business funds from a company I partially owned, to support his mistress. "We can pursue this multiple ways," Carol said, "but the most effective might be the most embarrassing for him. We can file a civil suit against both Robert and Jennifer for misuse of business funds. It would all become public record." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to protect my children from the embarrassment, from seeing their father publicly humiliated. But then I thought about research Ruth had mentioned. In 1990, only 9% of divorces involved people over 50. Now it's 36%. I wasn't alone in this. There were thousands, maybe millions of women my age going through similar betrayals. And how many of them stayed silent, protecting their husbands' reputations while destroying themselves? Do it, I told Carol. File everything. Let it all come out. The suit was filed on a Wednesday. By Friday, it was all over social media. My children were mortified but supportive. Robert called, screaming, threatening. I hung up on him. Patricia called next, her voice venomous. "You've destroyed him," she hissed. "His reputation, his business, everything. Are you happy now?" "He destroyed himself," I said calmly. "I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." The fallout was swift and brutal. Robert's business, which had been struggling anyway, collapsed. Clients dropped him. His professional reputation, carefully built over decades, shattered. The business community in Chicago is smaller than people think, and word spread quickly. Robert Freeman was a liar and a thief who'd stolen from his own wife. Jennifer, facing her own legal troubles and public embarrassment, left him. Just left, according to Emily, who heard it through the grapevine. Apparently she'd believed Robert when he said his wife was terrible and the money was all his. When she realized she'd been dating a man who'd stolen from his wife and used stolen money to fund their relationship, she wanted nothing to do with him. Robert's fall was complete. He lost his business, his reputation, his mistress, and eventually, most of his stolen money. The courts ordered him to return the assets he'd hidden, and while some of it was gone, spent on the condo and the lifestyle he'd been living, most of it was recovered. My lawyer was fierce and thorough, and she made sure I got back what was mine. Patricia's children cut her off after learning the full extent of her involvement. Apparently they'd had their own issues with her over the years, and this was the final straw. She tried to blame me, telling anyone who'd listen that I was vindictive and cruel, but most people saw through it. She'd helped her brother steal from his wife. There was no defending that. I should have felt victorious. I'd won. I'd recovered my assets, exposed the truth, seen justice done. But mostly I felt exhausted and sad. This was my life, 42 years of it, reduced to legal documents and financial settlements and public scandal. My therapist helped me understand that winning the legal battle wasn't the same as healing from the trauma. Recovery would take time, maybe years. I needed to rebuild not just my bank account, but my sense of self, my ability to trust, my understanding of who I was outside the context of my marriage. Ruth called regularly, checking in, encouraging me. She sent me articles about women who'd reinvented themselves after divorce, success stories, tales of triumph and transformation. Some of them felt impossibly aspirational. These women started businesses, traveled the world, found new partners, built entirely new lives. I was 67 years old and exhausted. How was I supposed to do any of that? But then Ruth said something that shifted my perspective. "You don't have to do anything grand," she told me. "You just have to do one small thing that's entirely for yourself. One thing that makes you happy. Start there." I thought about what made me happy. It had been so long since I'd asked myself that question. Before Robert, before marriage, before children, what had I loved? I remembered sitting in my college dorm room with Ruth, dreaming about the future. I'd wanted to travel. I'd had a list of places I wanted to see: Paris, Rome, London, Athens. I'd been saving money from my summer jobs, planning a post-graduation trip that never happened because I met Robert, and plans changed. I pulled out my old journals from college, stored in a box in the attic. Reading them was bittersweet. The young woman in those pages was so full of dreams, so confident, so ready to take on the world. When had she disappeared? When had I stopped being her? I made a decision, a radical one, given everything that had happened. I was going to take that trip. The one I'd planned 45 years ago and never taken. I was going to Europe. Emily thought I was crazy. Mom, you're in the middle of a divorce. You're supposed to be recovering. Maybe wait until everything is settled. But I was done waiting. I'd waited 42 years for Robert to appreciate me, to see me, to value me. I'd waited for him to change, to get better, to become the man I'd hoped he was. I was done waiting for permission to live my life. I booked the trip for 3 months out. Paris first, then Rome, then London, ending in Athens. 4 weeks in total. I hadn't taken a vacation longer than a long weekend in decades. The settlement process dragged on, but my lawyer assured me it was progressing. Robert tried several times to negotiate, to plead poverty, to claim he couldn't afford to return all the money. My lawyer shut him down every time with documentation of exactly where the money had gone and how much he actually had. In the meantime, I started preparing for my trip. I bought a new suitcase, got my passport renewed, started taking French lessons online, remembering the 3 semesters I'd taken in college. Every small step felt like reclaiming something I'd lost. 3 weeks before my trip, I had a final confrontation with Robert. He came to the house asking to talk. Emily was there, and she insisted on staying in the room. He looked terrible. Older, worn down, defeated. Part of me felt sorry for him, but only part. I never meant for it to go this far, he said. I made mistakes. I'm sorry. You're sorry you got caught, I said. You're sorry you're facing consequences. You're not sorry for what you did. I loved you, he said, and he actually looked surprised when I laughed. You don't steal from people you love, I told him. You don't lie to them for years. You don't conspire with your sister to hide assets from them. You don't build an exit strategy while they're trusting you completely. That's not love, Robert. That's not even close to love. He tried to argue, to justify, to explain. I let him talk until he ran out of words, and then I said something I'd been preparing for weeks. I forgive you, I said. He looked shocked. Relief flooded his face. But I'm not doing it for you, I continued. I'm doing it for me. I forgive you so I can let go of this anger and move forward with my life. But forgiving you doesn't mean I trust you or want you in my life. It just means I'm done letting you take up space in my head. He left after that, and I never saw him again. All our remaining communications went through lawyers. The divorce was finalized 2 weeks before my trip. I owned the house outright. I had my share of the business assets, the recovered money, and a settlement that would keep me comfortable for the rest of my life. I was free. I spent my last night before the trip at Emily's house, having dinner with her family. My grandchildren were excited about my adventure, making me promise to send postcards and bring back souvenirs. My son-in-law, usually quiet, told me he was proud of me. Emily hugged me tight and whispered that her college roommate Margaret would be proud too. The flight to Paris was long, but I didn't sleep. I was too excited, too nervous, too aware that I was doing something entirely for myself for the first time in decades. When the plane landed and I stepped out into Charles de Gaulle Airport, I felt something shift inside me. I was in Paris. Actually in Paris. Me, Margaret Freeman, 67 years old, newly divorced, standing in France. The trip was everything I'd hoped and more. I wandered through the Louvre for hours. I sat in cafes drinking coffee and watching people. I climbed to the top of the Eiffel Tower despite my fear of heights. I ate croissants for breakfast and wine for dinner. I got lost in Rome and found my way again. I stood in the Sistine Chapel and cried at the beauty. I walked the streets of Athens imagining ancient philosophers. And somewhere in those 4 weeks, I found her again. That young woman from the college journals. She'd been there all along, buried under years of sacrifice and service and self-neglect. She was older now, scarred, wiser, but she was still there, still dreaming, still hopeful, still alive. I met other travelers, some my age, some younger. We shared meals and stories. One woman, a widow from Australia, told me she'd been traveling for 6 months since her husband died. At first, it was escape, she said, but now it's discovery. I'm discovering who I am when I'm not someone's wife. I understood exactly what she meant. When I returned home, I was different. Everyone could see it. Something in the way I carried myself had changed. I'd spent 4 weeks being responsible for no one but myself, making decisions based solely on what I wanted, and it had transformed me. The house felt different too. I'd hired a painter while I was gone, at Ruth's suggestion. The walls were no longer the beige Robert had chosen 20 years ago. They were soft blue in the living room, warm yellow in the kitchen. My colors, my choices. I started making more changes. I joined a book club, started taking watercolor classes at the community center, volunteered at the library where I'd worked decades ago. Each activity was something I chose, something that brought me joy, something that had nothing to do with taking care of anyone else. My children worried at first that I was doing too much, moving too fast. But I wasn't running away from grief. I was running toward life. There's a difference. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I had lunch with my 3 children. They'd asked to meet, said they had something to discuss. I worried it was about Robert, that he'd asked them to intercede, to try to reconcile. But it wasn't about Robert at all. "Mom," Sarah said, "we want to talk about Aunt Patricia. She's been calling us, leaving messages. She wants to apologize, to make amends." I set down my fork carefully. "What do you want me to say?" James leaned forward. "We're not asking you to forgive her or have a relationship with her. We're just telling you she's trying to reach out. What you do with that is up to you." I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. I don't need her apology. It wouldn't change anything. She made her choices. I've made mine. I'm at peace with that. Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "We're proud of you, Mom. The way you've handled all this, rebuilt your life. You're inspiring." I felt tears prick my eyes but blinked them back. "I'm not trying to be inspiring. I'm just trying to be myself." "That's what's inspiring," Sarah said softly. We talked about other things after that. Emily's promotion at work, Sarah's new relationship, James's plans to go back to school, normal family conversation, but it felt different now. I wasn't the family caretaker anymore, the one everyone depended on. I was just Mom, a person with my own life and interests and dreams. That night, alone in my house, I pulled out the old photo albums. I looked at pictures from my wedding, from vacations, from holidays with the whole family. Robert was in so many of them, smiling, looking happy. Had he been happy? Had any of it been real? I realized I'd never know, and more importantly, it didn't matter. Whether he'd loved me truly and fallen out of love, or whether he'd been pretending all along, the result was the same. He'd betrayed me, and I'd survived. I'd more than survived. I'd rebuilt. I came across a photo of myself from about 10 years ago at a family reunion. I was in the background, slightly out of focus, while everyone else smiled at the camera. I looked tired in that photo, worn out, like I was already fading away even then. I looked at my reflection in the window, comparing it to that photo. The woman looking back at me now was older, yes, but she looked more alive, present, here. The gray in my hair that I'd stopped dyeing months ago framed my face like silver threads. The lines around my eyes were deeper, but they were laugh lines now, not just stress lines. I looked like someone who'd been through fire and come out stronger. Research shows that 1 in 5 nursing home residents experiences neglect at least once per year. I'd read that statistic during my therapy sessions, part of my therapist's effort to help me understand that my experience wasn't unique. Elderly people, especially elderly women, are often undervalued, their contributions forgotten, their needs ignored. I'd been heading down that path. Another 10 years with Robert and I would have been completely erased, a ghost in my own life. The affair, horrible as it was, had been a wake-up call. It had forced me to see what was happening, to fight back, to reclaim myself. In a twisted way, Robert had given me a gift. Not intentionally, of course, but his betrayal had freed me from a marriage that was slowly killing me. His theft had forced me to become financially literate, to understand my own worth in concrete, measurable terms. His affair had pushed me to remember who I was outside the context of being his wife. I wouldn't thank him for it, but I could acknowledge it. Ruth came to visit again for my 68th birthday. We celebrated with champagne and Italian food, toasting to survival and new beginnings. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The way you handled everything? Going public? Fighting back?" I thought about her question seriously. "Never," I said finally. "I regret trusting him so blindly for so long. I regret not paying attention to the warning signs. I regret losing myself in my marriage, but fighting back, reclaiming what was mine, refusing to let him write the narrative? No, I don't regret any of that." "Good," Ruth said, raising her glass, "because you're inspiring women everywhere. Emily told me you've been getting messages from women who saw your story, women going through similar situations. You're helping people just by being honest about what happened to you." I had gotten messages, through Emily, through friends, sometimes from complete strangers who'd heard about the case. Women thanking me for fighting back, for not being silent, for showing that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Their words meant more to me than any legal victory. 1 year after the divorce, I hosted Thanksgiving at my house. All 3 of my children came with their families. My grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter. We cooked together, told stories, played games. It was chaotic and wonderful. Robert wasn't mentioned once, not because we were avoiding the topic, but because he simply wasn't relevant anymore. He'd become the past, a chapter that had closed. We were writing new chapters now. After dinner, Emily found me in the kitchen, washing dishes despite everyone's protests that I should rest. "Mom," she said, "I need to tell you something. Mark and I have been talking about money, about our finances. We're setting up separate accounts in addition to our joint account. We're both going to maintain financial independence while being partners, because of what I learned from you." "I'm glad," I said, hugging her. "Not glad that you needed to learn it that way, but glad you learned it." Sarah came in next. "Mom, I'm going back to school. I've always wanted to get my MBA, but David thought it was unnecessary." "Well, screw what David thinks. I'm doing it." James was last. He stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable. "I didn't tell you this, but I broke up with Amanda. She was pushing me to propose, and I realized I didn't want to. I was doing it because I thought I should, not because I wanted to. You taught me it's okay to say no, even when people expect you to say yes." I looked at my 3 children, all grown, all learning their own lessons from my experience, and I felt a fierce pride. Maybe this was the real legacy of everything that had happened. Not just my own liberation, but teaching my children to value themselves, to maintain their independence, to never lose themselves in trying to please others. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and thought about the past year. The pain, the betrayal, the fear, the anger, but also the growth, the discovery, the freedom, the joy. If I could go back in time and prevent all of this from happening, would I? It was a question my therapist had posed during one of our sessions. A year ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Of course I'd prevent it. I'd save my marriage, protect my illusions, avoid the pain. But now I wasn't sure, because preventing it would mean staying in that marriage, continuing to fade away, never discovering who Margaret could be on her own. It would mean my children never learning the lessons they'd learned. It would mean staying safe but small, protected but diminished. Maybe some things need to break before they can be rebuilt stronger. I picked up my journal, the new one I'd started during my trip to Europe. I'd been writing in it regularly, documenting this transformation, processing my thoughts and feelings. Someday, maybe, I'd share it with my grandchildren when they were old enough to understand. On this page, I wrote, "Today I am grateful. Grateful for the pain that forced me to wake up. Grateful for the betrayal that freed me. Grateful for the fight that taught me my own strength. Grateful for the ending that allowed a new beginning. I am 68 years old. I am divorced. I am alone. And I am happy." That last part surprised me most of all. I was happy. Not despite everything that had happened, but in some ways because of it. I'd discovered I didn't need someone else to complete me. I was complete on my own. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I'd been thinking about starting a blog, sharing my story more publicly, connecting with other women going through similar experiences. Ruth thought it was a great idea. My children were supportive. I created the blog that morning, titled it Awakening at 67, One Woman's Journey from Betrayal to Freedom. I wrote my first post, telling my story honestly, holding nothing back. Then I hesitated for a moment before hitting publish. This was it. This was me claiming my narrative, refusing to hide, speaking my truth publicly. Once I published this, there was no going back. I clicked publish. Within a week, the blog had hundreds of comments, women sharing their own stories, thanking me for speaking up, asking for advice. I answered every comment, created a community, built connections. What started as a way to process my own experience became something bigger. A movement, maybe, or at least a conversation. I received an email from a local women's center asking if I'd be willing to speak to a group about financial literacy and protecting yourself in marriage. I said yes. Then another invitation came, and another. Suddenly, I was speaking regularly, sharing my story, educating women about red flags and warning signs and the importance of maintaining financial independence. 2 years after my divorce, I was invited to speak at a conference on elder abuse and exploitation. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of people, I told my story. I talked about the theft, the betrayal, the conspiracy. But I also talked about the recovery, the rebuilding, the rediscovery of self. After my talk, a young woman approached me, probably in her 30s. "My mother is going through something similar," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But she won't fight back. She says it's too late, that she's too old, that she should just accept it. Can you talk to her?" I did talk to her mother, and then to another woman, and another. I became a volunteer advocate, helping women in their 60s and 70s navigate divorces and financial disputes and emotional recovery. I couldn't save everyone, couldn't fix every situation, but I could listen, offer guidance, share resources, provide hope. 3 years post-divorce, I met someone. Not romantically, though people kept trying to set me up. I met Patricia, not Robert's sister, a different Patricia, a woman my age who'd gone through her own late-life divorce. We met at a support group I'd started facilitating. She was newly divorced, angry, hurt, lost. I saw myself in her. We became friends, real friends, the kind who understand each other without explanation. We traveled together, took classes together, supported each other through good days and bad. She reminded me that loneliness doesn't have to mean alone. Community, friendship, connection, those were all forms of love too. My children watched my transformation with a mixture of pride and bemusement. "Mom, you're busier now than you were when you were married," James joked during a Sunday dinner. "When do you rest?" "This is rest," I told him. "Doing things I love, helping people who need it, living on my own terms. This is the most restful I've been in decades." And it was true. I was busy, yes, but it was a different kind of busy. Not the exhausted, resentful busy of endless, thankless tasks. This was purposeful, energizing, fulfilling busy. I went to bed tired but satisfied, woke up excited for the day ahead. Robert, I heard through mutual acquaintances, was not doing well. He'd moved to Florida, trying to start over, but his reputation had followed him. He was working odd jobs, struggling financially. Part of me, the part that had loved him for 42 years, felt sad about that. But most of me felt nothing. His struggles were no longer my concern. Patricia, his sister, had also moved away to Arizona, I think. I'd heard she'd tried to reach out to my children a few times, but they'd maintained their boundaries. Good for them. On what would have been my 45th wedding anniversary, I did something symbolic. I took off my wedding ring, which I'd continued wearing for almost a year after the divorce out of habit more than anything. I hadn't worn it in over a year now, but I'd kept it in my jewelry box. That day, I sold it, took the money and donated it to the women's center where I volunteered. The past doesn't need a shrine, I told Emily when she asked about the ring. It needs to be acknowledged, learned from, and released. 4 years after my divorce, I got an unexpected letter. From Robert. He'd written to apologize, a long, rambling letter full of regrets and explanations and requests for forgiveness. He was sick, he said. Cancer. He wanted to make amends before it was too late. I read the letter once, then put it in a drawer. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because I had nothing to say to him. He wanted absolution, closure, forgiveness. But I'd already given myself all those things. I didn't need to give them to him, too. Emily was angry when I told her about the letter. Mom, he's dying. Don't you want to at least talk to him? No, I said simply. He made his choices. I made mine. We both have to live with that. Or in his case, die with it. It sounded harsh, maybe, but it wasn't. It was just honest. I'd forgiven Robert years ago, but forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. I'd moved on. He was part of my past, not my present or future. Robert died 6 months later. My children went to the funeral. I didn't. I sent flowers and a card, but didn't attend. I spent that day volunteering at the Women's Center, helping a newly divorced woman figure out her finances. That felt more meaningful than sitting through a funeral for a man I no longer knew. Emily called me after the service. It was small, she said. Just Jennifer showed up surprisingly, looking guilty. And Aunt Patricia, a few business associates. Nobody said much. I'm sorry, I told her, and I meant it. Not sorry Robert was dead, exactly, but sorry my children had to grieve a father who disappointed them so profoundly. Don't be, Emily said. We're okay. We grieved the dad we thought we had years ago. This is just the official ending. 5 years after my divorce, on my 72nd birthday, I threw myself a party. A big one, with all my children and grandchildren, my friends from the support group, women I'd helped through their own divorces, my watercolor class, my book club. My house was full of laughter and love and celebration. Ruth flew in from Seattle for the occasion. She gave a toast that made everyone cry. To Margaret, she said, raising her glass, who taught us all that it's never too late to remember who you are, who showed us that endings can be beginnings, who proved that strength isn't about never falling down, it's about getting back up and refusing to stay down. Everyone cheered. I felt overwhelmed by gratitude, by love, by the sheer impossibility of where I was compared to where I'd been 5 years ago. That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, looking at the stars. I thought about that morning 5 years ago when I'd woken up to a text message that destroyed my world. I thought about all the pain and fear and anger that had followed. I thought about the fight, the recovery, the rebuilding. And I thought about this moment, right now, sitting peacefully in my own home, surrounded by evidence of a life well lived, looking forward to tomorrow with excitement rather than dread. If I could go back and tell that 67-year-old woman sitting in her kitchen with shaking hands that 5 years later she'd be happy, fulfilled, purposeful, free, I don't think she would have believed me. The distance between that woman and this one seemed impossible to cross. But I'd crossed it. Step by painful step, I'd crossed it. I pulled out my journal and wrote one final entry for the day. Today, I am 72 years old. I am divorced. I am surrounded by people who genuinely love and value me. I am helping others find their own strength. I am living a life that's entirely my own creation. I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. And tomorrow, I start planning my next trip. Maybe Greece again, or somewhere new. The world is wide, and I finally have the freedom to explore it. I closed the journal and looked up at the stars again. Somewhere out there, other women were going through what I went through, feeling that same shock, that same betrayal, that same fear. I couldn't reach them all, couldn't save them all, but I could keep telling my story. I could keep showing them that survival is possible, that recovery is real, that life after betrayal can be richer than life before. That's my legacy now. Not the 42 years I spent being someone's wife. Not the decades I spent sacrificing myself for others. But these last 5 years, when I finally learned to be myself. I woke up to a text saying, "Your husband is mine," and it destroyed me. But it also freed me. And now, 5 years later, I can finally say she picked the wrong wife. Because I wasn't the wife she thought I was. I wasn't even the wife I thought I was. I was so much more, buried under years of self-neglect and misplaced loyalty. And her text, as painful as it was, forced me to remember that. So here's my question for you, the one I ask everyone who hears my story. Have you lost yourself in trying to please others? Have you given away your power, your voice, your worth? It's not too late to take it back. It's never too late. Share your story in the comments if you feel comfortable. Let's create a community of survivors, of fighters, of women who refuse to disappear. And if my story resonated with you, if it helped you in any way, please like this video and subscribe. Not for me, but for the next woman who needs to hear that she's not alone, that recovery is possible, that life can begin again at any age. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of my journey. And remember, you are worth fighting for. You always were.